I'm going to put my flipper hat on here in a back flipper hat on, and we are going to get into it here.
But I get it. From a practical standpoint, it does seem like it's a ripoff.
I get it. Title, maybe it's not, maybe you haven't convinced me that it's necessary, but I get it. It's very important, title insurance, for all the reasons that you laid out. But it just seems so complicated. I mean, can you just explain to me what title insurance actually does?
Sure. Well, I think I can. It is a pretty big deal, and it does cover you, as we've said a little bit earlier. It does make sure that you have marketable title to the property, and you want to have that when you get ready to sell the property. And there's going to have to be a title policy written in connection with a subsequent sale of the property. And you really want to find out if there are any problems with title. It's and it also covers more than just whether you have marketable title to the property. So often a lender will require a survey, because there's an endorsement to the policy that's required that covers things like encroachments. Is someone else's improvement, is a neighboring house or shed or fence on the property that you're buying that would constitute an encroachment? Or is the house that you're buying or the fence that surrounds the house that you're buying actually encroaching on the property of a neighbor? And also, you can get coverage for things like environmental liens and other things that are important to your ownership of the property.
You know, Bob, you're speaking my language now when you mention the easements. I have a friend who's also a flipper. He backed out of a deal last year. Why? Because the property had a massive easement on it, which came out during the process. So just explain to me, does title insurance protect against right of ways?
It does and it doesn't. And you can get protection to a certain extent by getting an endorsement to the policy. But we, as I'm sure you know, non-flipper Mike and I did a presentation about easements and surveys and that sort of thing a while ago. And unfortunately, a survey and title insurance typically will only protect you from easements that are of record. And so you can get an endorsement to the policy that will cover you for things that would be revealed on a survey. And that would include easements as well as encroachments that are of record. But as we talked about in that prior presentation, it's very important that you, when you're buying property, get at your boots on the ground. You're looking at this property. So you need to go out there and look for potential easements that might exist that are not of record. And an easement, as we talk about on that other presentation, is a right to use property. It's not an ownership right, it's a right to use property. So if you go on the property and you see there's a path where there's wheel ruts where cars have been driving back and forth and on a regular basis across the corner of your property, you need to ask, what the heck is that? Because if it's not part of an easement of record, it could be a problem. And so it needs to be investigated, because you may or may not have title insurance coverage for that particular use of the property.
Now, I just want to make sure I understand, Bob. When you talk about putting easements on the title policy, are you talking about the owner's policy, or are you talking about the lender's policy?
Yes. I am talking about both policies. And the secondary mortgage market will not allow you have to get what's called an Alta 9 endorsement to protect you against encroachments or easements of record. Those all have to be on there. This highlights, the two policies and the differences between those policies. And as I said earlier, one of the primary differences is the amount of the policy. There are differences between the owner's policy and the lender's policy. There are certain exceptions that will apply to the owner's policy that will not apply to the lender's policy. And these are typically things that are within your control that you know about. So an example would be the mechanics liens for someone who's made prior improvements on the property. Or so if you start work before you buy the property, and I don't recommend doing that, there could very well be a potential lien that would relate back from the suppliers of materials or the people performing that work to the date that they supply the materials or the date they started work. And if that's before the closing of the transaction, then there could be an exception for that. And so the owner's policy would typically, you would not be able to get insurance for that because you as the owner are in control of that. So, and there are other exceptions. Exceptions are exactly what you would think they are. When you're looking at your title policy, there are a number of things to look at. One is all of the exceptions that the insurer is taking. One of the typical exceptions is that they will not insure anything that would be visible on a survey. So you then have to get, if you want to have coverage for that, you're going to have to get an endorsement that will protect you from that. And we'll cover endorsements more in a minute. The other thing that you'll see is conditions, which are related to exceptions in that if those conditions are not satisfied before the policy is issued, they become exceptions. An example of an exception a condition might be, we have to see a copy of all the formation documents of the entities involved in this transaction and review them and make sure that those entities are properly in existence and can do this transaction before we, the insurer, will insure this transaction. So that's the example of a condition. There are many other conditions that the insurers may put on issuing the final policy. The other thing that we need to talk about here is endorsements. And unlike exceptions, which reduce the amount of coverage, endorsements increase the amount of coverage. And there are many different kinds of endorsements that can be obtained. And Mariah, if we can go to the next slide, you can see here, and I guess this slide kind of, Flipper Mike, answers the question about, is title insurance complicated? With in the affirmative, that it is kind of complicated. These are the endorsements that most lenders in the fix and flip business will require, depending upon the circumstances. But as you can see from the numbering, there are many endorsements that are available. It's between 50 and 100, I think, different kind of endorsements, and the price of these endorsements and the impact on the transaction will vary. Many are surprisingly inexpensive or are even free. And so you need to know what to ask for to make sure that you're getting these if you want to be fully insured. So the condominium endorsement, for example, will insure you against condo liens and things like that. And so you need to think about getting that if you're buying a condo. Same thing with the PUD endorsement, which covers when your property is part of an HOA. Environmental liens, as a lawyer Mike will tell you, and not Flipper Mike, can be catastrophic. They are typically superior to all other liens on a property, and are applied by law to the property with what's called strict liability. It doesn't matter whether you caused the pollution or not, that environmental lien is going to attach to the property. And so getting insurance for that is very important. But the next one on the list, the encroachments, easements, and things are covered by the Alta 9, which is a very important endorsement that covers things that would otherwise, that are visible on, on a survey. It trumps the survey exception, right? The survey exception says you're not insured for anything that would be visible on a survey. Well, the Alta 9 reverses that and basically says that you are insured for such things. And oftentimes the closing agent will insist upon getting a survey, or state law may even mandate getting a survey. Covering all the available endorsements is obviously well beyond the scope of this presentation. What I think you should take away from that is that you could have coverage at a reasonable expense for conditions on the property, whether they be physical conditions like environmental lien, or their legal conditions like potential encroachments or easements. These are things that you can get insured by asking for an endorsement. And so you need to, if there's something about the property that troubles you and you're thinking of backing out of the transaction, maybe because you're worried about what it means, and whether or not, and there's some risk there, then you can ask the closing agent, is there any coverage for this? I don't really, we don't have enough time to fully investigate this before closing. I want to get insured just in case something, and they'll have the expertise to advise you whether there is an endorsement that might provide you some protection or not, and what the cost of that might be. And again, some of these are free. Some of them, on the other hand, not only have a monetary cost, but they may create delay in your transaction, because if the insurer is going to take responsibility for something, then they may need to do their own investigation and due diligence, and that may take some additional time and delay closing. So you'll have to balance the value of the insurance offered by the endorsement with the impact that it has on the transaction and the cost of the endorsement as you move forward. So unfortunately, Flipper Mike, I think the answer is yes, title insurance can be complicated, but that doesn't mean it isn't valuable.